I'm not the house of cards that falls down easily. I'm strong enough to handle what you throw at me.
Welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I'm your host, Kristen Sunanta Walker. Just what are we going to discuss? The intimacy that is mental health. Let's continue to make it as comfortable as discussing brain health or heart health. This show has been on the air for several years, and we have amazing co-hosts. And then we created a network of podcasters on mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com, a place where every possible facet of mental well-being can be talked about openly. My show, after several hundred interviews, the format is this: intimate, deep, funny, touching, sometimes uncomfortable, but always vulnerable conversations with interesting people. The goal is to have you, our listening family, many of you who have become my good friends, feel as though you are listening in on private conversations. Thank you for tuning in and becoming part of this amazing journey with me, and now with our network of podcasters. Just knowing this podcast might be helping any of you realize you are not alone on this journey called being a human being makes doing this podcast worth every second.
After all we promised, we'd be cordial.
Hi everyone, Kristen Walker here. We are back with Dr. Lisa Day. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Kristen.
So today we are going to talk about the Dark Triad, and there is a woman that is a very good friend of mine. Her name is Christine Louis de Cannonville. She's from Dublin, Ireland, and sometimes I call her just to hear her talk with her accent. But she's written a book, which is one of the most popular books on this subject. It's actually called The Three Faces of Evil: Unmasking the Full Spectrum of Narcissistic Abuse. And she talks about a basic understanding of the Dark Triad, from narcissistic personality disorder, malignant narcissism, to the most pathological, the psychopath. So please, everyone, if you want to know about her book, you can go to narcissisticbehavior.net and order it there. But for today's show, I love it, Lisa, that you want to get into this. So please share with me, why you wanted to do this, and the listeners, of course, too, and what the Dark Triad means to you.
Well, I'm as you're introducing it, I'm thinking perhaps it is part of my Dark Triad qualities that I have a sadistic need to look at the Dark Triad. And
well, we all have a shadow, but some of our shadows are not evil.
Side. Well, and when you think of it, it sounds like a crime novel, right?
Right.
Dark Triad. And just when we thought things were tough enough, you and I've done so many shows about narcissism and narcissistic mothers and narcissistic lovers and all the complications and challenges with dealing with a narcissist. And then we have the Dark Triad. And, for our listeners, the Dark Triad is not necessarily a pathological, it often can be a subclinical triad. But when we think of it, it's the darkest, most destructive of the personality type. So we've got, the narcissist, who certainly is in pursuit of ego gratification. They have a sense of superiority, grandiosity, dominance, entitlement. They feel like they're better than others or more superior. And so most of us are very familiar with the narcissist. But then there's the Machiavellian. And when we think of Machiavellian, we can think of the M&M, right? So the Machiavellian is incredibly manipulative. And they're calculated and they're deceitful. Can be quite amoral, in their personality, and the self-interest and personal gain is, of utmost importance. And their goal is to undermine others. And then you add the third quality of the Dark Triad, the psychopathy, and that's the callous, the impulsive, those with antisocial or bold behaviors, a complete void or lack of empathy, lack of remorse, very impulsive. And so when you put the three of those together, the narcissist, the Machiavellian, and the psychopathy, we really got a triad that can be quite a force to deal with.
See, Lisa can't even say Machiavellian.
I have a denial that it exists. We're going to call it the big M.
Yeah. And, well, I want you to say malevolent right now, because that's another M word that you don't like.
Malevolent.
There you go.
The M&M. The M&M.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because if you look at it from an evolutionary perspective, there are advantages for the Dark Triad. because, when you have these subclinical presentations, they don't have neuroticism or anxiety, and that can help facilitate one's goals, in adverse, conditions. The narcissist, they're in the pursuit for power, status, and wealth. And then the M&Ms, as I'm going to call them, they're socially manipulative, but they don't have remorse. And so when you put those three together, some of the studies will look at in the mating game, right? So pursuing a mate, those qualities can be advantageous, but in the relationship world, incredibly destructive, just horribly destructive.
Right.
And
they're very good at getting what they want, but they are horrible at keeping it.
absolutely.
And they don't even care really about keeping it. Once they've sucked the life out of and gotten the juice out of whoever the target is, they really don't care about it anymore.
They lack empathy. They lack remorse.
Exactly.
Well, unless of course you reject the narcissist, and then you're going to get an aggressive response. But but interestingly, if you look at employment studies or career studies, if you look at narcissism, it correlates positively with salary. I mean, we've got people in high positions, left and right, who have this dark triad, and beware, right?
Well, the stock market, they actually had people take Robert Hare's psychopathy checklist, which is, worldwide famous. It's the checklist needs to be updated, which he agrees also that it does, but it's what is used, right? And they would have potential stockbrokers take that test or fill that out. And if they scored high in psychopathy, they were hired.
Wow. Wow. Well, they have a disproportionate representation in leadership positions. They just do, compared to, the population.
Right.
So, which is strange. We've got psychopaths leading our country and big businesses,
Right. And leading countries all over the world and big business all over the world. Yeah.
Well, and while, they have the ability to put their interests first and to manage people and impressions of people and to pursue their goals with great confidence. And certainly those are all components of success. But that hardness, I guess, is somewhat adaptive, but the success is at the expense of others. It's sometimes to themselves, but certainly, their unethical white collar crime, lying, deception, and cyber aggression are things that, come to ultimately cause failure, in their positions. And maybe they don't fail out of the job, but they complicate certainly the work environment for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And they will shoot themselves in the foot just to be right. So as an example, I have some friends of mine that the CEO of a company started a company. It is a wonderful organization. And then because it's, unsustainable, the pursuit of it and the creating it and doing something amazing was sustainable, but actually managing it, you have to have empathy for being a do-gooder company, right? Couldn't do that. So started to, unravel and destroy the company. Then the board came and took it over. And so instead of thank you, now you're going to do with the company what should be done with it, I'm going to cash out. It wasn't like they took it away from this person and then they were left with nothing. They got a nice big check. Well, now they're going to destroy what they created just to win. That's why that Machiavellianism comes in, because you have to know what you're up against when you decide to take on someone with that kind of a disorder. I know, because I have, and I'm very careful about when I choose to do it and when I choose to go, yeah, I'm not up for that.
Well, and I think what you're pointing to is that they're pervasive patterns of behavior. They're not roles or characteristics that people step into. They're, part of their operating system. And, I think the narcissist, if you look at empathy, has a little bit more than the other two qualities of the other two components of the dark triad. But basically speaking, it's who they are and how they operate. And it's to win, to be right, self-advancement, grandiosity. They'd rather cheat than work. Why work if you can cheat or get it for free? And very little remorse. They look you straight in the face. I had a client here, I guess this was actually back in Seattle, and this was more the romantic stance than it was in the business world. But she was the victim, if you will, of identity fraud, identity theft. and her credit cards that were being used and what have you. And she was working with authorities to try to track it down. And meanwhile, living with her boyfriend, her happily, in love with her boyfriend, and of which she would give him the rent money to pay the rent. And he was lovely and kind and charming and bought her all kinds of gifts. And it was probably about 3 months into therapy where she came in to me, white as a ghost. And she said, my landlord contacted me because I was 7 months, 6 months, 3 months, I don't know, there were several months delinquent in rent, only to find out that the identity theft was from her live-in fiance who was pocketing the rent money to buy her gifts and had stolen her identity. And complete lack of remorse, the denial, that happens when we're involved with someone like that is profound, but complete lack of remorse, complete manipulation, and complete self-serving. He was financially supporting himself and she thought she was in love.
And, it's fascinating to me, who has been doing podcasts on this subject for a long time and have other podcasters on Mental Health News Radio Network that do shows just about this topic. That's the only thing they talk about. It's a whole cottage industry writing about narcissism, writing about narcissistic personality disorder, doing therapy around it, having workshops. It's become its own industry. And what is fascinating and has been the biggest woe for me is the number of people that write about it, talk about it, put themselves up as a healer, as a helper, and they are what they write about. And the reason why, yes, the reason why they write about it so well, and they can have hundreds of thousands of followers, they can write about it so well because they are talking about and writing about themselves.
Yeah. Oh, that's really powerful. Really powerful. I wonder how much negative reference they make or how to deal with or how to set boundaries, with that dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we know that the Dark Triad in and of itself is, just resembles conflict and chaos, aggression. Yes. It's not a productive dynamic, to say the least. No. Much like the Bermuda Triangle, I guess I would say.
Yeah, they don't let things go.
Well, and it's interesting too, Kristen, because so many times when we think of psychopaths or antisocial personality disorders, we go to criminals, right? We think Ted Bundy, we think, serial killers. And yet, it's so important for our listeners to know that antisocial characteristic, psychopathy, it can be subclinical. And so we look at these people and typically they're good looking and quite charming. Mm-hmm. And so we're not quick to think, oh, here's a Ted Bundy, and here's someone who's going to, a Jeffrey Dahmer, someone who's going to murder me. But they have enough of those qualities, the lack of remorse, the self-interest, the desire for manipulation, that we can get wooed into, relationships with these. And there's I don't know, you probably are familiar with the Dirty Dozen scale. Have you heard of that?
Yep.
Yeah. And, for our listeners who haven't, we look at the scale and who would own up to it, right? So what is the questions? Do you manipulate others or do you lie to others, flatter others, seek personal gain in your interactions, lack remorse, not concerned for the morality of your actions, if you're mean and insensitive, cynical, you desire and need the admiration of other people, crave attention, you need the favor from others, or you seek status and prestige. Most narcissists I know wouldn't check those, right? Yeah. Because they have that inflated ego. But it's interesting because what research is showing, obviously, is that, when folks have the guts to address these, that they can really predict that dark triad in relationships and with people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that where people get lost on the journey of figuring out when they've been in a relationship like this and how to heal from it, because let me tell you, you will spend a lot of time in therapy dealing with being in one of these relationships, or at least I hope you will anyway. Mm-hmm. I think what kind of trips people up is we all have narcissistic traits. It's part of being human, and it's something that we work on. But, that's where shame and guilt and things like that come in to make us, and empathy to make us go, oh, that maybe and self-reflection, maybe I shouldn't behave that way. That wasn't so good. All of those things. Well, that is something that these kind of people don't do. They don't even have the capacity to do this. So we, as people who are not part of the dark triad can get lost in, well, is it us? Or are we this? Because we're so used to empathizing with others that we even empathize with the narcissist.
Well, and clinically, when I work with folks who realize that they are in relationship, whether it's business, and more often it's going to be a romantic relationship, when they realize that this is what they're involved with, there's, as I mentioned, there's a tremendous amount of denial at first. But I think that one of the most damaging things, among many things, I mean, we can talk about that for 10 shows, but one of the most damaging things that I experience and I observe and work with to the operating system of the person, most commonly a woman, because this dark triad is disproportionately represented in men, but is that the individual who's involved with someone with these qualities not only has been hurt, deceived, cheated on, stolen from, but they've been so heavily gaslighted the entire relationship that not only do they lose the trust for their partner and other people, but the more disturbing part is that they lose the ability to trust self.
Yes.
And when the longer the relationship, the greater the damage. And that takes a long time to heal. That takes a long time to heal.
It does. It takes a very long time to heal. And it's, it's been an 8-year journey for me from figuring out exactly what this is, because I was involved with someone that had, was diagnosed by other therapists. It's been 8 years of just walking through this, and I see patterns, the same patterns with everyone that's, coming into survival mode from this kind of a relationship. And that not trusting yourself puts you in a place of, or part of the process is being very judgmental yourself, because you don't trust yourself because you got into this kind of a relationship. So you blame yourself. And so you are constantly sort of looking for the sociopath around the corner. And every person you meet, I'll have people that I meet that are new that'll say, oh, yes, I can tell that you're a nice person. Or I will tell them that like they're trying to tell themselves that. And I say, well, I mean, I try to be. I don't always hit the mark, but I try to be. But it's like they need to confirm for themselves. Or I will tell them, oh, this thing happened that was uncomfortable with someone that maybe, they're part of the dark triad or they're veering close to it. And they go, oh, and they're very judgmental about that. You let them do this to you. And I understand that that's a stage that we all go through, because I did that too for a while.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think if we look at that, clinically speaking, you've heard me say this before, but the foundation of love, is that of trust and respect.
Mm-hmm.
And the fractures in both those areas when you are involved with the dark triad and absolutely a narcissist, either or both, they're profound, and they don't restrict themselves to the romantic relationship. Right. So your foundation of knowing how to love other people is profound. And I tell people that generally speaking, when you have fractures to that extent in the arena of trust and respect, you're looking at 3 to 5 years in the healing process. It's not just getting out of the relationship. That's a boundary, right? That's the geographical space and time. But 3 to 5 years before you would be comfortable or begin to navigate vulnerability, trust, and come close to learning how to respect other people, because you've been so shamboozled, and your own trust of self, so very destroyed.
Absolutely. I mean, in the long run, it's all tools that those of us that have empathy, and especially those of us that are loaded with it, highly sensitive people or highly empathic people, or even some people call empaths, it takes you on such a wonderful journey of self, of the most profound self-love, healthy self-love that you can imagine. But you walk through fire to get to that place. And it's not a destination. It's just a constant journey. So it's worth it, but it's very, very painful, very painful.
Well, and I think of it too. I often compare growth to my ACL tear and repair, which is the ligaments in your knee, right? So, I have 2 torn and repaired, and though they're both repaired, I have an eye on them at all times. I can't jump off, a block, if you will. I have to be cognizant in my step. I don't wear high heels. There's your life is permanently modified, because of that
Yes.
injury. And I think it's the same thing when you have found yourself in such a destructive relationship that many of those wounds don't heal. You just become acutely aware of when they're flaring up and how to modify your environment accordingly. But it's a lifelong process for sure. And then, well, you might be able to speak to this one, Kristen. If you are raised by someone who demonstrates these qualities, then it's a lifelong journey
Oh, absolutely.
of being aware.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And it's a lifelong journey of, looking at your own behavior. I talked about this on a show on my podcast where I had a Sunday not too long ago where I wasn't putting myself on the rack in any way. It was the first time that I did a personal inventory and I looked at all of the things, the behaviors or the situations I've been in where I really didn't like how I behaved, and just looked at it very clearly. I didn't feel great about it. And we all have that. This is not anything new. Every person on the planet, Gandhi had those moments. Okay. So, but to be able
welcome to the human race,
exactly.
Right? Yeah.
But to be able to do that without the shame, you must be inherently evil, trying to compare to the people that I've unfortunately, been around since childhood. It was a great thing to sit there and go, oh, thank God you can do a personal inventory now and adjust your behavior how you want. And you don't immediately shame yourself for this. You just take your lumps and you go on to the next phase. And what that told me was I have worked so hard on filling my own cup, self-care, self-esteem. And that is hard to do when you're in these kinds of relationships. But it just was a benchmark for me of, I've done some good work here. That doesn't mean I get to rest on my laurels, but it does mean that I can go, wow, this is what it's like to walk in my life feeling really good about myself as a human being, instead of always feeling like there was something just horrible and wrong with me.
Well, and so freeing and so liberating, right?
Yep.
And one of the problems, though, I think that people run into is that when they discover that they're involved in a relationship with someone who has these qualities and they do their own work, I think this is true in many cases in psychology. There's an assumption that the other party has done their work as well. And yet,
no, they
right?
just know how to sound like they have. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you've heard me say before that when narcissists, generally speaking, that's not always, but generally speaking, when narcissists come into therapy or when the Dark Triad, when you notice, oh boy, I've got the Bermuda Triangle here in my office. They don't typically get better. They don't typically heal. They get better. And when I say they get better at their manipulative,
Yes.
exploitative, deceitful tacts. They just now begin to quote the therapist or
Yep.
they
learn how to manipulate better.
Yeah. Yes. Will you come with me to this funeral? I need you to, hold space for me. And it's no, and please hear my no. That's my boundary. Right. And so it's, they just get better, and people often ask me, in therapy, they're like, well, okay, so I realize I'm in relationship with this person, or maybe this person is my father or my mother or my sister or my brother or what have you. And they say, how do I deal, with these people who have these qualities? And I make that akin to oftentimes when I do speaking engagements, people will say, Lisa, how do I deal with this? How do I deal with this jerk in my life? And my answer is always the same. And I say, why would I want to teach you how to deal with a jerk?
Whoa.
I say, run, don't walk is the first, meaning geographical space and time is often your best recourse when you find you're in relationship with the people like this. But we don't always have that choice, right? So, some other things that I teach people is that, because the Dark Triad is so very self-absorbed and because they're so very charming, they do their best work in person, face to face. Research will support that. So I say, to the extent that you're able, you want to correspond via email. And I say email because it can be documented.
Right.
I tell them less is more, talk less, listen more.
Edit.
Yeah. And you and I have talked about this before with boundaries as well, is that never, ever, ever with this triad defend or explain, because you just leave yourself wide open for a slaying, right? And then the subsequent gaslighting And then in the workplace, we find that the Dark Triad, these people can often have a fair amount of anger, and aggression, and they can be passive aggressive or avoidant and sulk. And what I teach folks is to not, I quote, say, don't pick up the rope, meaning like in a tug of war game, and to observe but not interact with the manipulative ploys. And that takes a little bit of setting back to stop. I say stop, look, and listen to realize, am I being flattered, charmed, and manipulated? And this, Kristen, you come to a point, you and I are both on a different, we're long in our journey of healing, from being on the receiving ends of these. And I say, you can smell them.
Yes.
You can smell them, because they, it's that person who comes to you with so much charm. And what was once flattering and would pull you in, it makes you want to puke, right? You're like, oh no, here's one,
Yeah.
How do I protect myself?
And I think too, part of gaslighting is also them getting your gas, your fuel. They don't know how to, they can't create their own fuel. They're not a rechargeable battery of, their own. They only recharge through extracting power from other people. You as an empathic person can recharge your own battery. They don't have that. So they are always, it doesn't matter, what the situation is. I don't care if they look like $1 million and, and you don't. It doesn't matter. They are still pathologically envious of you for one reason, and that is because you can recharge your own battery and they cannot. And they are very angry at anyone who can do that, even though they must extract and go to and deign to go to other people because they have to. That's the only way they can feel. So they will gaslight you, but they'll also steal your gas. And one of the things that is fascinating that I've taken to lately is when we're in those relationships, our bodies do betray us. We are getting adrenaline dumps. We are getting our physiologically to a state of this constant fight or flight. And so part of the getting out of those relationships is having our body chemicals calm down. There's a lot of work that needs to go into making that piece happen. And for me, I can tell now, I am going to need to not engage, because that can easily trigger that adrenaline dump, and then my body I will start then having to fight my physical chemistry to keep engaging with this person. So I sort of take this attitude of, where people say, if a bear goes to the bathroom in the woods, did it really go to the bathroom? Because you didn't see it happen. So that's how I look at, like, they're going, and I'm somewhat of a public figure in the little bubble that I'm in. So they're going to write crappy things about me. They're going to put things on their website that are copyright infringement. They're going to say things. But if I don't, exactly. But if I don't look at any of that stuff, then I don't know that it's happening. And my friends and colleagues know, don't tell me. I don't want to hear about it.
Well, and I think that is so profound, Kristen, because I think that, when I counsel friends or family or clients that are, moving away from this kind of dynamic, I really do say the best response is no response, no contact. And the empathy, those of us who have healthy general empathy, that just seems mean and unkind. It seems like we're avoiding and we're in denial.
It's like we're being like them, and so we don't want to be like them. But that's not what it is.
It's not. And I say no contact, literally block on text, block on email, do not correspond, because any correspondence is that opportunity to, what you're saying, fuel that pathological dynamic. But I think what's important, for those of us who are on the healing journey or want to be on that healing journey, is that, as you're saying, we become addicted to the drama, but it's not that it's an addiction that we develop. These relationships, you've heard me speak before about, generally speaking, relationships fall into one of two categories, in my opinion, and somewhere in between. So on a spectrum, so we can have those that are generally intimate, and those are ones that are, the foundation is based on trust and respect. It's like-minded people who energize. We have each other's back. It's nurturing. It's vulnerable. It's safe. We embrace the weaknesses of each other, and we set each other up for success. True intimacy. Conversely, Intense relationships are characterized by chaos and drama, judgment, criticism, power, and control. And the allure when we find ourselves in a relationship with the dark triad is that they sweep us off our feet.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
the whole
Absolutely.
beware of the wow factor, right?
Mhm.
It's intense. It's intensely wow. They're intensely successful. They're intensely charming. They're amazing lovers. They've got this, that, and the other. So it's intense, intense, intense. And once, the individual begins to realize that, oh my goodness, this intensity, it's intense, all right, but it's a pathological intensity. It's very difficult, as you say, to not get pulled in, because while we don't want the dysfunctional intensity, we're drawn to that intensity. And so the boundaries with self are, when I work with folks, is the most difficult. I say no contact, no response, no contact, no response. And if it's someone that you have to be, in correspondence with, say, because of parenting plans, shared children, or what have you, or business relationships, it's email, less is more, no defending and explaining, the boundaries, right?
And sometimes they aren't charming and attractive and successful. Sometimes you are those things. Okay.
Oh,
you
good
are
point.
those things, and they are coming at you, and they are still offering you the world. I will do this thing for you, love you the way you've never been loved, or I will bring you a project and I'll do all the work and every need. You don't have to do any of it because you're a successful person. You're used to having control of everything. And then someone comes to you and says, I'll do it all for you because you're so amazing. They're flattering the heck out of you, and they're not successful. Their influence is that of a grain of sand in the Baltic Sea. However, you find as you go through the project, oh, right.
This is empty.
They can't
You have
do
no
anything.
data.
Exactly.
You have no information. There's no backbone. There's no substance here.
And you are going to do all the work, and then you're going to have to go to therapy dealing with the
I'm going to do all the work
and get done.
Well, I'm going to do all the work, and you are going to take all the credit. There's the M&M at its finest, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yep. And in the end, when you tell them, I'm done, here's all the facts, the same as the charming ones, the same as the successful ones. Okay. Unsuccessful ones do this too. When you're done and you say, I'm done, I'm pulling the plug, I'm out. However way that manifests for you, whatever, you measure it by how quickly can I do no contact, not that you didn't do it right away. I did it quicker than I did it last time. I'm getting better. That's how I measure success for myself. And that when you pull the plug, they are going to come back with a vengeance, and you are going to deal with it the best way that you can. And then you're going to get to that place where you just don't care, and you don't look, and you don't engage, work through whatever process you need to. Look, I'm just as guilty as anyone, raising my hand right now. I have engaged. I have been ticked at being ripped off, lied to, I am human. I have empathy. Those things can be tripped up in me. But again, okay, this one took me 3 months to figure out and go completely no contact and get to the bears pooping in the woods and I don't care stage. That's better than last time that took me 6 months.
That's definitely movement in the right direction, my friend. Yeah. Well, and the other thing to remember, in that process, then when we move from that better than life, bigger than oxygen position, and we set that boundary and we move into no contact, then we become dissected. They will identify, attack, and do any attempt to destroy. So we went from this amazing personality who's got the world at her hands to some low-life loser who doesn't know, her right from her left hand.
And they're the victim of you. Like they could be stealing from money from your clients that are charities, and you pull the plug on it because that's stealing. Mm-hmm. And yet their story to the world is, oh, I'm the victim of this horrible person. You, who they put on a pedestal when they first met you. So that's another trippy thing that happens.
Well, it comes back to the why work when you can cheat or lie.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so whether we're on the receiving end of these folks romantically or in the business dynamic, they're all over. And again, not all of the dark triads are going to present, at a diagnostic level of pathology, but it's that triad together. And they look good, whether they're whether it's outside or inside, they look good. They draw us in.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's so deceiving. And so when we are deceived and duped, if you will, it's really easy for us to turn the anger on self of, oh, you got to be kidding me. How did you, what in the world were you thinking?
And
you know,
try not to listen to people that tell you that too.
Oh, everybody around you is going to say,
oh yeah,
well,
I
we
saw
could see
that. And I'm like, I will say this about Dr. Lisa Day, listeners. She's one of those people that will tell you, this has been my experience. This isn't good. And that is so helpful. I'm one of those people too, because she and I have learned society isn't really set up to help you deal with these kind of people, because we don't want to acknowledge that they even exist because it's unpleasant. So it's much easier to have someone tell you they're in that kind of experience with someone in the dark triad and say, I saw that coming. Yeah, I knew that something bad was going to happen. You can't blame people for being that way, because that's really the way that we're made and handcrafted. But once you've been in the battle zone and you're on the side of trying to help others with this, then you become someone that goes, I'm going to go against that. And I'm going to say, before the inevitable, horrible end, I'm going to be a helper, and I'm going to tell someone, hey, I'm experiencing this with this person. It's not great. And I just thought you should be aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes some
courage.
Courage, because you don't want to be accused of being a negative person or talking trash about someone or what have you. But I am so grateful to the people like Lisa and Christine Louis DeCannibal, some of my other friends, that will say, before I get to this is one of those people that will tell me, hey, this is what's going on. I don't like it. I think you should watch out for this.
Something's not right. This boat don't float right, and something's wrong here. Yeah. Yep. And that's actually a good point too, though, because when we find ourselves in relationship with the dark triad, we want to keep an eye on, if things seem too good to be true, they probably are. Yes. They probably are. And this is where, we talk about codependency. And I say that, to the extent that we give people qualities they don't have, or more importantly, in this case, disregard qualities they do.
Right.
And if we have to lie to ourselves in order to remain in that relationship, then we're detaching from self. And that's usually a good indication that our radars are up, warning, 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 but we're being charmed and flattered into, we're being worked, we're being manipulated, we're being fed into something that ultimately is going to be pricey, both emotionally, relationally, business-wise, financially. And so it's an ongoing challenge, right?
Yep.
And I wish I would say that these people, dark triads, would come into therapy, but the only time that they do come into therapy, in my experience,
when they're forced.
Well, when they have a problematic, non-compliant partner, and they want to come and tell me how,
order.
Yeah, or court order, right? Or they want to tell me how this non-compliant, a difficult partner needs to be changed so that they can, be more compliant with the needs of the dark triad character. So it's sad. These people, unfortunately, and I feel sometimes, Kristen, that we talk about narcissism as if it's something to run and not walk from at all cases. But sadly, the amount of folks who do come in and who genuinely seek change, in my experience, I'm going to give it, ample and say less than 10%, but I'd probably say less than 5%.
Right.
It's only when, it's kind of like alcohol, when they're sick and tired of feeling sick and tired, from the negative fallout, that they say, wow, perhaps I've gotten these qualities from this, there, and the other, and help me.
Right. And, it's not that we can't have friendships with people who are extremely narcissistic. There's a difference between someone who is extremely narcissistic and someone who has narcissistic personality disorder. The difference is, someone who's extremely narcissistic, in my experience, can be a very caring human being that had a lot of trauma as a child, or they are a longtime addict, or there are many, many reasons why they are this way, and they know it, and they work hard to not be this way. They don't go around looking for chaos, drama, and causing pain to others. Extremely narcissistic behavior doesn't always lend itself to, that person enjoys the destruction of others. It's when it becomes a personality disorder is when you're looking at someone that is constantly trying to excavate for drama, cause trauma, splitting, and so on. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think it comes back to where you started this podcast, in that it's a true evil, and we don't like to think of that word, or we get afraid of that word. But, I remember after the, and this isn't necessarily a dark triad individual, but I remember after the Columbine shootings years and years ago, and I don't even remember who it was on NPR, but I really respected his boldness in saying that we need to remember there is evil in our world. There's evil in our world. And I think that, to be aware of the dark triad, not to live in fear of it, but to be aware of it and to not lie to ourselves and to be truthful with something doesn't feel right. If something feels too good to be true, it is. And to listen. I often say, if we've had a history of being involved with narcissists or with folks in the dark triad, I'm a big advocate of putting what I call the committee together. And, and you know where I'm going with this, right? And the committee is someone who can give us an objective observation, because when they are not the ones who are smitten, drawn in, or sold by the manipulative tactics of these folks, our loved ones, our committee, are able to say, something's not adding up here, and I would encourage you to either run, not walk, or to proceed with caution. But so if we've had those experiences, I'm a big advocate of developing a committee that's trusted people that you can lean on.
Absolutely. And I know we're closing here, but another thing you can do is, and this has been probably the most helpful thing for me, is I'm such a big connector, let's bring someone else in, and I want to share my success or this opportunity with the people that I think are fantastic. And sometimes I'm working or have worked with someone who's part of the dark triad, and I'm doing that with them and they love it. But the minute that I start sharing some of that with everybody else, which is how I am and not how they are, they start to get very angry, and they'll start to try to split me with the rest of my friends and colleagues that are not part of the dark triad, who are just as committed to being generous with others as I am. And what's so helpful is when I start to see the narcissistic person's behavior, the wooing, the manipulation to one of my colleagues or friends, that's a big ding, ding, ding. I couldn't see it for myself because they were really good at hiding it and, being on their best behavior around me, but I'm witnessing it happen to someone else. That is such a great indicator for me to go, okay, you need to dial it back now, the amount of stuff you're doing with this person.
And boundaries, because these folks don't do well with confrontation.
No.
So, boundaries being what I will and will not do, control being what he will or will not do. Boundaries.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, what else would you want to, what do you want to close with on this one, Lisa? Because this is always such a meaty subject.
Yeah. Well, I think of the two realms. I think about the workplace, that it's often associated with success, both in business and politics. And I think about the relationship realm, that we see them often, the more empathic an individual is, the greater the likelihood they're going to end up with someone with these qualities. And I think that, again, learning how to listen to our gut, knowing what these qualities look like, and just adding them to our arsenal, if you will, of qualities to look at as we navigate through this thing we call life. It's just more it's out there. There is evil out there. There is the dark triad out there. And there are people who definitely do not have our best interests at heart. And for any of us who are empathic, who are loving and kind and desire the best for other people, as you were just sharing, we are the greatest likelihood to be victim of these kinds of people.
Absolutely.
So to beware.
Absolutely.
Yeah, beware.
And the last thing I'll say is this: when you are going through this, profound healing as a highly empathic person, you do get to a place where you can be in the presence of someone that just does a 180 on you when they realize that they are not going to get anywhere else with you. You may not have realized it yet, but the further you are in this healing journey, the quicker they realize that they aren't going to get much further with you, and they get mad. And so they'll start to project. And I've had that happen, and then them turn around and really start telling me all kinds of things about me that they've quote unquote noticed. And you're doing well when you stand there, and in the midst of hearing all of this stuff, you go, yeah, they are talking about themselves. And you don't even take it on. You don't even, in the past, that would have just taken me to the floor. And now I've done so much work and so much self-care that I can go, That, my non-friend anymore, is projection. You be talking about yourself, and it doesn't sit in my soul. I may examine some of it like, well, maybe that a little bit, but it doesn't sit in my soul and wound me at all.
I'm not going to take it personally. I'm going to see it as a reflection of their character.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, thank you for wanting to do this topic. You know how much I enjoy them.
That's that sadistic side coming out, right?
Right.
No, I think it's I as well, because
So
I think the more we can empower ourselves, the greater strength we have. Yeah.
Absolutely. And listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode on Meier Clinics podcast.
I know, no one likes commercials, but seriously, folks, without the help from these organizations, we could not stay on the air. Please give a shout out to zencharts.com. If you're a mental health or addiction treatment center, you'll want to use their EHR. It's gorgeous, and they're just good people. And also MyGenetics, MyGenetx.com, because knowing your genetic code empowers your mental health treatment. And lastly, CopeNotes.com. We love getting positive messages right to our phones every day from Johnny Crowder. He's the lead singer of Prison, a heavy metal band sharing their music about suicide prevention, addiction recovery, and mental health. See, that was painless. Support them as they support us. Back to the show.
Sometimes I'm passive aggressive, but never without good intentions. I heat up and act on my emotions.
Thanks so much for listening to Mental Health News Radio. Our podcast can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, and hundreds of other podcast apps, or you can visit our website at mentalhealthnewsradio.com. If you have a question or would like to be a guest, become a podcaster on our network, or join the amazing organizations that help keep us on the air, please email us at info@mhnrnetwork.com. Get ready for that special goodbye from our resident therapy dog, Miles, and a special thanks to Emily Sohn for letting us use her incredible song, Cordial, for our podcast music. Listen to the full song on SoundCloud at emily.sonne.
Don't be surprised when I don't hate on you. After all, we promised we'd be cordial. Sometimes in you I can fight it, but I'm opposing.
Good boy.